real crux of this slide is the first one, the one on your left, which is the cumulative emissions of CO2, and that's important because of the long atmospheric life of CO2. And if you look at that, you see that the red is much more red than blue in that. And like that argument may be subtle, hard for Australians to realise, but it's blindingly obvious to everyone in the third world, and it's just another example of this hypocrisy. So when Australians and Americans say we're not going to do anything about it until you do, it just reeks of hypocrisy. Okay, now green lash. When I was in the Millennium Assessment, I think I'm right in saying in the scenarios group, there were about 90 of us, but I was the only one trained in health. And they kept on asking me, come up with, they called it green lash. They said, think of some, like a disease going to come out of the jungle and sort of destroy us all, a rational reason to protect ecosystems. And I kept on saying, without much success, I have to say, in that Millennium Assessment, that I thought the real problem that was going to come from destroying ecosystems was human predators, if you like, you know, conflict. And in the last year or two, there is increasing recognition of the link between conflict, climate change, resource degradation. Ban Ki-moon made this statement soon after being elected Secretary General of the UN. I'll just read what's underlined. He talked about the potential for conflict growing out of competition over dwindling natural resources. Dealing with these issues is a great moral, economic and social imperative. Why isn't it? Oh, yeah. And the German Advisory Council on Global Change last year had another, this is a high-level scientific group in Germany, another report and showing multiple hotspots around the planet where climate change is likely to drive conflict and immigration. So it is coming into the mainstream agenda literature, and that's terrific. Doesn't always seem to go forward in my press. Okay. I might have. All right. So I'll get to the end. The second sermon. Just two propositions. I mean, I think we are in sort of the global middle. I mean, compared to the poor, we're very well off. But compared to Gates and Bush, we've actually got very little power per person. We're in a sort of global middle. And I don't think that we can do it on our own. And I don't think the poor can do it on their own. I think we need to persuade the powerful and rich to do it. And they're only going to do it if they hear enough of us. And they're only going to do it if they get frightened and also they see there's some solution. So I think that hypocrisy of the rich world, you know, led by political leaders, in which we all sort of victims, some of us willing and some of us unwilling, I think that will change if they get the message of enough concern for themselves and their children. So I do think you have to frighten them. It's going to be too negative for 5 minutes. Okay. But you've got to provide hope. And I think then the current example of spending, I think it's Joseph Stiglitz thinks, $2 to $3 trillion on a current oil war is, of course, an example of what not to do. Now, okay. Now, I was very pleased yesterday, there was a question from the floor, brought this up with Senator McMullen, and I had this in my talk, and I call it the great dilemma, and that was, if we reach the Millennium Development Goals, won't that, it might accelerate demographic transition in the third world, and that's a good thing, but won't it just expand that consumption bomb? Won't it just expand the ecological footprint? And I think it will. And that, but what's the alternative? If I press it twice, I'm going to slip it. Well, yeah. If we delay the Millennium Development Goals, then we delay demographic transition, so we increase the overall ultimate population. But I think, and arguably, in the Millennium Assessment, we thought as a group that in the long run that would actually also make the consumption bomb bigger, though they didn't use those terms. But I think more importantly, the longer we delay any genuine transfer of wealth to the poor world, we're actually shortening the fuse of that consumption bomb. And it is a dilemma. And I certainly side on that first. We've just got to do it, because the alternative, it's immoral, and I also think it's irrationally it's much more dangerous. So look, getting to the end, what is required? A new world order, campaign of hope, a lot of hard work, luck, or miracles, perhaps. Okay. Well, we need academic leadership. I do think it's very important that we have theories. I think academia has been pretty well corrupted by funding forces. We need theories about growth that reflect reality, not ideology. We need more integration at many levels. We need new institutions. What do I mean by institutions? Things like our values, our cultures, our religions, particularly globally, the way we think. How are we going to get there? I do think we need to stimulate change at the top. Providing, as we heard from Bill Ryerson yesterday, providing information without emotion isn't much use. But we need also, of course, to provide information, particularly, again, I think aimed at us in the middle. We're still a tiny minority, particularly concerned about population. But sort of in the last 15 years, we've seen climate change come, we've seen population go. Isn't that bizarre? But it has to. These things are so interrelated, and they have to come back to the agenda. And it is good to see that there were representatives of ACF and so on here, and the Green Movement in general has dropped the ball on population. And let's see if that should come back. But we need to work very hard to inform ourselves, people like us, and then to hope that the message filters through to the top. And of course, we're running out of time, as we've heard time and again in this conference. And we need to set examples to reduce suffering at the bottom for whatever is going to come. Because that fortress strategy is certainly not going to work. So a global campaign of hope. Well, people are saying, we need Pentagon-scale resources for the sustainability transition, which is multidimensional. Certainly the money's there. Can the technology be developed? It's questionable, but if we tried really hard, probably we'd get there. But we're not going to get there without it's going to have to be like Manhattan and Apollo and Pentagon put together. It's a global crisis. And we also need to provide some sort of security to prevent this sort of explosion of the consumption bomb. So if we do, as increasingly looks likely, we're going to get regional climate change-induced famine caused by our profligate behaviour. We need to guarantee that people aren't going to starve. We need to provide at least hope that we're going to work together as a world on this. Because otherwise, I do think global catastrophe in a dark age is in fact very plausible, particularly through weaponisation and the use of weapons, and I don't want to let the imagination go in that way. And clearly we need all religions and social movements to take this on board. And other miracles, technological ones. And the last slide. So panda bears are a rare commodity, and it's very unusual actually to see 4 panda bears together. Apparently they're rented out at $1 million each per year to several zoos in America, but they're just on their own. But when I saw this slide, I thought those panda bears are very relaxed, they're having a great time, and given enough resources, humans can cooperate and have a party. Alan Jones mentioned yesterday about Ornstein and Ehrlich's book, and are we sort of hardwired to party? And well, we do like to party, but we can also see problems, and I think we can change our behaviour. And I think another thing from yesterday, Frank Fenham mentioned the use of sub-incision as a family planning mechanism among Indigenous populations in Australia. And I don't know if there was a sort of Aboriginal Malthus or whether they just worked it out collectively. I mean, kangaroos have a similar mechanism for carrying capacity when they suspend fetal development in times of drought, and they clearly don't conceptualise that. But whether or not Aboriginals conceptualise it, as a group they certainly reach that strategy. And I think, it's not beyond impossibility that we can do it. But if you look in the next sort of 50 years, it's clear we're going through a sort of an eye of a needle, and it is going to be very, very difficult. But I think we can get there still, but we really need to work on it. And so meetings like this are a great contribution, and I think thank you again for having the chance to speak to you about these very complex issues.